Hello, in this video I want to talk about several aspects related to planning and information system security management. When we talk about planning, more often than not, we narrow down on this whole idea of security policy and complying with security policy. We put the onus on the employees as to they should be complying with whatever the security policy might be in that particular company. And in order to ensure compliance, there's an often used strategy that many organizations claim, and that is that if you do not comply, we are going to reprimand you. Or if you comply, we are going to give you some kind of a reward. So reward and compliance have gone together for many, many years, and reprimanding people have as well. Now, the problem, of course, is that you're forcing people to comply, or you're asking them to their intention to comply, but that does not necessarily mean that they will comply, because perhaps nobody even talks about whether the security policy was correct in the first place. Nobody even considers what is in the security policy, how it was created, and what plans should be based on that particular security policy. This is one very important element that needs to be considered. Compliance with the security policy is very intrinsic to individuals. You're going to comply if you believe in that particular security policy, if you think that the organization is nice with you, if you think that you are going to be rewarded, not because of compliance, but because of good behavior as such. I call that emancipated behavior as far as cybersecurity compliance is concerned, which has not really been looked at as aggressively in the literature as it should have been. The second element that I like emphasizing when talking about security policies and planning is that policy is really a series of steps that an organization should take in order to ensure the protection of information assets. The problem, however, is that nobody considers or thinks about the strategy that the organization has. It's the strategy that drives the policies. Policies should not be the sine qua non of an organization. It's the strategy, it is the vision that they should have. And the security posture of a firm is a function of the vision and the strategy which derives the policy. So this is again something that has not been very well considered by the academic and the practitioner world as far as cybersecurity is concerned. The third element that I like talking about when it comes to security policy compliance is what are the founding principles on basis of which we create a security policy. So one of the main principles that I like adhering to is that a well-conceived corporate plan establishes a basis for developing a security vision. So if the company does not really have a vision or a well-defined plan, whatever efforts they put into security policy formulation, implementation, they are going to be a waste of time, because more often than not, people are just going to be reacting to the problem of security rather than proactively thinking about what should be done and what should be the purpose of what their actions are. So in order to avoid that reactionary approach to security, it is important to sit back and think in terms of what your plans are, what your vision is, what do you aspire the company to be, right, rather than reacting to the problem domain. So that's an important aspect that is often ignored as well when we are thinking of building security into our enterprises. The second principle that I like adhering to is that secure organizations lay the emphasis on the quality of its operations. So this is again a very important element that needs to be thought in terms of how security should be built. Now, one can put in all sorts of control mechanisms. We are again going to be afterthoughts at best, but if your operations, if your business operations are not highly integral, or they do not really focus in terms of the formal rule structures that have been created, and they are adhering to the culture or the norms of the organization, you're going to have a problem. Because the quality of the operations is a function of how well you have thought through things, and the security is a consequence of bad, security problems are a consequence of bad operations. So high quality in terms of business processes and management is absolutely critical if good security has to be built into the organization. So that's an important element, and we see problems with those time and again. May it have been the Home Depot security fiasco that we had, or the Anthem, they all go back to one fundamental reason, and that is your operations were flawed. There was some gap in how you were doing things which caused the organization to have that particular breach. The third principle that I like focusing on is that security policy denotes specific responses to specific recurring situation and hence cannot be considered as a top level document. This is something that I was talking about a little earlier because what we end up doing is we lay all this effort on creating the best possible security policy without even considering whether it reflects the practices of the organizations. There are templates available from different consultants who are going to come around and say, here is a template for acceptable use policy, here's a template for your password, here's a template for how roles are defined. Now, role definition and role-based access control is very particular to a given organization, and hence there are actually challenges even today about managing roles in organizations and how those roles are going to get reflected in a given security policy or an information technology implementation related to that particular security policy, because many times in flatter organizations the definition of roles is not very clear. Maybe we need a fresh look at how we can allocate responsibilities and authorities. Maybe a fresh look at responsibility-based access control is something that is absolutely critical nowadays and should be thought about. So these are things that we need to be cognizant of, and we are working on security policies and its implementation in organizations. And the fourth element is that information system security planning is a significant, there's a concurrent evaluation process. So when you have a security policy, people typically do not think in terms of how they are evaluating their current practices. Is something wrong with their current practices? Just because a security policy is asking you to do certain things in a certain way does not mean that we should blindly follow that particular approach, but we should reflect on every element of our evaluation process as to why we are doing what we are doing. Are our business processes okay? Are our information technologies appropriate? Do they sync in with how we are doing things, and what kind of controls? What are the implications of those controls? How are we changing the organization structure? How are we changing the responsibility structures? Those are very important elements in the evaluation process, which will determine how you can go about ensuring security of an enterprise. I'll also take this opportunity to have a plug for a piece of work that we did many years ago, and which has taken different shapes and forms now, and that was to create a security policy template of sorts. You know, how organizations should go about, what are the critical things that they should be focusing on. And in this particular template of security objectives, as I call them, we identified a bunch of fundamental objectives and means objectives, and each of those should be the starting point for any assessment, if at all, evaluation and assessment, if at all, for how well you're doing in terms of security. So the fundamental objectives that we found, and these are all based on our interviews with a large number of chief information security officers around the country, and they gave us, and we used a certain method to kind of distill out what they were saying and create these objectives. So the fundamental objectives that we came up with included maximizing awareness, ensuring right human resource practices, developing an ethical environment, high integrity business processes, management development practices, establishing data integrity, organizational integrity, privacy, and individual ethics. All these details are in the book, of course, but there are a couple of things that I would like to touch upon in terms of these particular fundamental objectives. If you think in terms of maximizing awareness, for example, you know, sometimes it's very interesting to see this. Sometimes we increase the awareness through these training programs and say, you know what, I have trained you, I have made you aware, but that does not necessarily mean that now people are going to be complying or people are going to be good at ensuring security. So awareness alone is essential, but it's not the ultimate aim for any security policy success. So I think beyond awareness, some kind of a training program needs to be instituted, and an important element in this whole thing is competence building. It is not about making people aware and training them. but have we actually built competence in terms of managing security? And competence is a very interesting word and a concept in the management literature, because if you talk about competence, you're really talking about the idiosyncratic combination between comprehension of the task that you have, do you understand the business you are in, and the skills that you're going to ascribe to that particular understanding, to that comprehension, to that particular business process. So many at times you give wonderful skills. Skills can be taught. We teach them in universities, but that does not necessarily mean that that individual or those group of people understand or have the comprehension of the business processes which link a given task to an outcome in the world of security. So the combination between your understanding of the business you are in, the skill sets you might have, and they both come and give you some kind of a competence. Now, competence is something you can't see. You can only measure or assess competence based on outcome measures. What happened as a consequence of you being more competent? Were you able to protect yourselves in terms of a breach? Were you able to ensure that virus infections did not creep into your networks? Were you able to do X, Y, Z? So those are the outward measures for a competence. But it is important to understand that you cannot build competence with just training and making people awareness. That's the skill set. I might be a wonderful person who knows everything about Linux and Red Hat, but that does not necessarily mean I understand the business in which I'm supposed to be functioning, and that understanding and comprehension exclusively is going to help me build my capability and competence. That's an important element, and we often ignore that. We just follow a cookie cutter approach of training and awareness, and without understanding how competence can be built. So those are some of the issues that are important as far as cybersecurity planning is concerned. It's a vast topic area. There's only so much you can cover in a video such as this. Thank you.